Have you ever wondered why some relationships thrive while others fall apart? The secret might be in the way partners communicate and support each other. That is your communication style. In the next few minutes, we'll talk about the 7 communication pitfalls that could be sabotaging your relationship right now. But don't worry, I've got your back with practical solutions for each one. Many people underestimate the power of effective communication in relationships. Unfortunately, there are several common communication mistakes that can gradually erode even the strongest bonds. So let's get right to it. Number 1, not listening actively. I used to think communication was the key to good conversation, until I realized comprehension is you can communicate all you want with someone, but if they don't understand you, it's all in vain. Many people have experienced conversations where they felt their words weren't truly being heard or understood by the other person. This common situation can lead to frustration and miscommunication. This usually happens when people are distracted or just waiting for their turn to speak. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about today. The art of active listening, or rather, the lack of it. Let me ask you this question. Do you know the difference between hearing and listening? Think about it for a moment. You might be surprised by how often we confuse the two. Active listening is more than just hearing words. It's about fully concentrating on what's being said, understanding the message, and responding thoughtfully. It's like, really tuning into the other person's frequency. But here's the thing, we're all guilty of making some common mistakes when it comes to listening. Let me break it down for you. For instance, there are people that have what is called waiting to talk syndrome. They're not really listening. They're just waiting for their turn to speak. Does this sound familiar? We also have the mind reader syndrome. They think they know what their partner is going to say, so they start formulating their response even before the other person is finished. Another major issue is the distraction attraction syndrome. That is when your phone buzzes annoyingly during an important conversation. At this time, you receive a notification from your phone that you need to buy groceries, and suddenly, you've missed half of the conversation. We've all been there, right? So, how can you improve your active listening skills? Here are some game-changing tips. First, focus fully on your husband or wife. Put away your phone or turn off the TV and give them your undivided attention. Secondly, use nonverbal cues to show you're engaged. Some nonverbal cues that you could use include nodding in response to what your partner is saying, maintaining eye contact, and also leaning in slightly. Next thing to do is to paraphrase what you've heard. It shows you're listening and helps clarify any misunderstandings. And then ask open-ended questions. This encourages the spouse or partner to elaborate and shows you're interested. And lastly, avoid judgment. So try as much as possible to listen to understand, not to evaluate or criticize. Let me share a quick story that perfectly illustrates the power of active listening. A few years back, my husband was known for always having the right answer, even before I finished explaining the problem. One day, during an important discussion about our family finances, he interrupted my thoughts with his solution. I stopped, looked at him, and said, "Honey, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I haven't even explained the full scope of our financial situation yet." So that moment was a wake-up call for my husband. He realized he'd been so focused on proving his worth as a provider that he wasn't really listening to understand the issues at hand. Over the next few months, he made a conscious effort to listen more and speak less. The change in our relationship was remarkable. Not only did our communication improve, but his contributions to our family discussions became more valuable because they were based on a full understanding of our situations. Now, I've got a challenge for you. In your next conversation, try to implement at least one of the active listening techniques we've discussed. Maybe it's paraphrasing what the other person said or asking an open-ended question. Then, pay attention to how it changes the dynamic of the conversation. You might be surprised at what you learn when you truly listen. Remember, effective communication is a two-way street. It's not just about expressing yourself clearly. It's also about receiving messages accurately. And that, my friends, is where active listening comes into play. As we move on to our next communication mistake, keep this in mind. Every great relationship, whether personal or professional, is built on a foundation of listening and understanding. Then number 2, you know what they say about assumptions, right? They lead both of us to incorrect conclusions. Assumptions can be relationship killers. So let's see why making assumptions instead of asking questions can be very dangerous for our connections with others. Before anything else, let's talk about the danger of assumptions in relationships. When we assume, we're essentially playing a guessing game with someone else's thoughts, feelings, or intentions. And let me tell you, we're often way off base. These misunderstandings can lead to hurt feelings, arguments, and a breakdown in trust. It's like building a house on quicksand. Sooner or later, everything is going to sink. But why do we tend to assume in the first place? Well, it's kind of hardwired into us. Our brains are constantly trying to make sense of the world around us, and sometimes our brains take shortcuts. We fill in gaps with our own experiences, biases, and fears. It's quicker and easier than asking questions, right? Plus, sometimes we're afraid of looking stupid or vulnerable by admitting we don't know something. But here's the kicker. This easy route often leads to much bigger problems down the line. So, how can we break this habit? It's all about mastering the art of asking clarifying questions. Here are some techniques you can try. First off, use open-ended questions. Instead of "Did you like the movie?" Try "What did you think about the movie?" This gives the other person room to express their full opinion. Then, reflect back what you've heard. You can say something like this: "If I understand you correctly, you're saying so, and so, right?" This shows you're listening and gives them a chance to clarify if needed. Again, ask for examples. You can say, "Can you give me an instance where you felt that way?" This helps you understand the perspective of your partner better. And lastly, check your interpretations. This means that you can ask them this kind of question. "When you said X, did you mean Y? Or am I misunderstanding you?" This shows you're trying to understand, not just jumping to conclusions. Now, let me share a real-life example of how assumptions can wreak havoc in a marriage. I once knew a married couple. They'd been together since college and married for about 10 years. One day, the husband got a promotion at work that he had been eyeing for months, and he was over the moon and couldn't wait to celebrate with his wife. So when the man Johnson returned home to share the news with his beloved wife, Benita, her response was cold, to say the least. Johnson assumed Benita was jealous of his success and was deliberately trying to deflate his excitement. He felt hurt and angry, thinking his wife couldn't be happy for him. Meanwhile, his wife had assumed that Johnson knew about the terrible day she'd just had. She had been laid off from her job that morning. She thought Johnson was being insensitive by gushing about his good news when she was in such pain. The result was that both of them retreated and felt hurt by what they perceived as the other's lack of support. Many days went by with minimal communication, with each of them nursing their wounded feelings. It wasn't until they sat down for dinner one evening that the truth came out. Johnson had no idea about his wife's job loss, and Benita hadn't realized how important the promotion was to her husband. All of this could have been avoided with a few simple questions. "How was your day, honey?" Or "Is this a good time to share some news?" This story shows how easily assumptions can derail even the strongest of relationships. It's a stark reminder of why it's so important to ask questions instead of assuming. So here's my challenge to you. The next time you find yourself making an assumption about someone's behavior or motivations, stop, take a deep breath, and ask a clarifying question instead. It might feel a bit awkward at first, but trust me, it's a game changer for your relationships. Remember, good communication isn't about being a mind reader. It's about being curious, open, and willing to listen. So let's ditch the assumptions and embrace the power of asking. What about you? Have you ever had an assumption that nearly ruined your relationship? Or maybe you've saved a relationship by asking the right questions at the right time. Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might just help someone else avoid a communication pitfall. As we move on to our next communication mistake, keep this in mind. Assumptions are the termites of relationships. They eat away at the foundation in silence until the whole thing collapses. So let's be proactive and start asking those important questions. Let's get into our third communication mistake, avoiding difficult conversations. We've all been there, right? That knot in your stomach when you know you need to have a tough talk, but you'd rather do anything else. Well, buckle up because we're about to tackle this head on. To begin with, why do we avoid these conversations? It's simple. They're uncomfortable. We're afraid of conflict, of hurting someone's feelings, or of being hurt ourselves. Sometimes, we worry that bringing up an issue might make things worse. It's like we're playing emotional hot potato and nobody wants to get burned. But here's the thing, Avoiding these talks comes at a cost, and it's a steep one. When we sidestep difficult conversations, we're essentially letting the problems linger. It's like ignoring a small leak in your roof. Sure, it might not seem like a big deal now, but give it time and you'll end up with a ceiling caving in. In relationships, avoidance can lead to built-up resentment, misunderstandings that spiral out of control, loss of trust and intimacy, and missed opportunities for growth and a deeper connection for each other. So, how do we bite the bullet and have these tough talks? Here are some steps to prepare. In the first instance, clarify your intentions. What do you hope to achieve? Are you looking to solve a problem, express feelings, or reach a compromise? Then choose the right place and time. Pick a moment when you're both calm and have privacy. And sometimes you need to go out where both you and your spouse will be alert and in a neutral space, far from the sanctuary of their bedroom. Next, listen actively. Be prepared to hear the other person's perspective without interrupting. Again, stay focused. Stick to the issue at hand rather than bringing up past grievances. And lastly, be open to solutions. Come with an attitude of problem solving, not playing the blame game. Now, let me share a success story that shows just how powerful addressing issues can be. There's this friend of mine who has been married for 15 years. His marriage was on the brink of divorce, mainly because both him and his wife had been avoiding a particular difficult conversation for years. He was unhappy with their lack of intimacy, but felt awkward bringing it up. On the other hand, his wife was frustrated with the man's work hours, but didn't want to seem unsupportive of his career. They both silently stewed, growing more distant by the day. Finally, they decided to visit a counselor who encouraged them to have those tough talks they'd been avoiding. It wasn't an easy one because there were tears, raised voices, and moments when they thought they'd made a mistake. Anyways, they still persevered in order to save their marriage. To their surprise, when they started talking openly and expressing their feelings, they realized their issues weren't as insurmountable as they'd feared. The man learned that his wife Sarah's frustration came from feeling neglected, not from a lack of support for his career. The woman also understood that her husband's long hours were partly due to his fear of not providing enough for the family. When they finally addressed the issues head-on, they were able to make changes. Mike made an effort to be more present at home, while Sarah expressed her appreciation for his hard work more often. They also set aside regular date nights, picnics, and vacations to maintain their connection. The good news was that their marriage not only survived, but thrived. Within a short time, I was happy to see them being closer than they had in years, all because they found the courage to have those difficult conversations. So here's my challenge to you. Think about a conversation you've been avoiding. It could be with a partner, a friend, a family member, or a colleague. Now, commit to having that conversation within the next week. Use the steps we discussed to prepare, and remember, the temporary discomfort of a difficult talk is nothing compared to the long-term pain of avoidance. What's your experience with difficult conversations? Have you ever resolved a major issue by finally addressing it? Or do you have a strategy for making tough talks easier? Let's hear your thoughts. All right, let's get into our fourth communication mistake. One that's so common, you've probably made it today without even realizing. I'm talking about using the you statements instead of the I statements. This might seem like a small detail, but trust me, it can make or break a conversation. So what's the difference between you and I statements? Well, it's all about perspective and responsibility. You statements often come across as accusations or blame, while I statements express your own feelings and experiences. Let me break it down for you. You statement, you never listen to me. I statement, I feel unheard when we talk. See the difference? The you statement puts the other person on the defensive, while the I statement expresses your feelings without attacking. Now, let's talk about the impact on the listener. When someone hears a you statement, their natural reaction is to defend themselves. It's like, when someone points a finger at you, your instinct is to point one right back. This creates a cycle of defensiveness and counterattacks, and before you know it, you're in a full-blown argument. On the flip side, I statements invite empathy and understanding. They open up a dialogue instead of shutting it down. When you express your own feelings, the other person is more likely to listen and try to understand your perspective. So, how do we rephrase accusations into feelings? Here's a simple example. Instead of saying, "You're always late," say this: "I feel frustrated when we're late to events because it makes me anxious about what we might miss." This approach not only expresses your feelings, but also explains why the situation bothers you, giving the other person more context to understand your perspective. Now, let's do a quick exercise to practice converting you statements to I statements. I'll give you a statement, and then you try to rephrase it in your mind. Here it is. You're so careless. Now rephrase it. So tell me in the comment section, what did you get? Remember, the goal isn't to avoid addressing issues, but to do so in a way that promotes understanding rather than defensiveness. Here's a challenge for you. Over the next week, try to catch yourself when you're about to use a you statement. Pause, take a breath, and rephrase it as an I statement. It might feel awkward at first, but with practice, it'll become second nature. And hey, don't beat yourself up if you slip up now and then. We're all learning and growing. The important thing is to be aware and make an effort to communicate more effectively. So let's move on to the next point, number 5, interrupting or talking over others. Have you ever been in the middle of sharing something important, only to have someone cut you off mid-sentence? It's frustrating, right? Well, this one's a real conversation killer. My friends, let's kick things off with a question. How does it make you feel when someone interrupts you? Take a moment to really think about it. That feeling you're experiencing, that's the psychological impact of interrupting in a nutshell. When we're interrupted, it's not just our train of thought that gets derailed. It can make us feel devalued, disrespected, and even anxious about speaking up in the future. Studies show that frequent interruptions can lead to increased stress levels and decreased productivity. It's like, trying to build a house of cards in a windstorm, pretty much impossible. But here's where it gets interesting. The way we view interruptions can vary wildly depending on our cultural background. In some cultures, overlapping speech is seen as a sign of engagement and enthusiasm. For instance, in many African and Latin American cultures, interrupting can be a way of showing interest and participation in the conversation. On the flip hand, in Japan or Finland, interrupting is often seen as extremely rude. It's a bit like dancing. The steps that work in one ballroom might get you kicked out of another. So, how can we become better listeners and avoid the interruption trap? Here are some strategies that will be total game changers. First, practice active listening. Focus entirely on what the other person is saying, not on what you're going to say next. Again, after someone finishes speaking, pause for 2 seconds before responding. This ensures they've finished their thought. Another thing to do is to use nonverbal cues, such as nodding, maintaining eye contact, and leaning in slightly. All these can show you're highly engaged without interrupting. If you must interrupt, do it right. Sometimes interruptions are necessary. When they are, apologize and ask permission. For example, you can say, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but may I ask a quick question for clarification?" Be mindful of your body language. Avoid signs of impatience like looking at your watch or phone, or even pacing about. Remember, becoming a better listener is like developing any other skill. It takes practice and patience. But trust me, the payoff in your relationships will be huge. Now, let me share with you one of my favorite quotes about listening. It's from the Greek philosopher who said, "Be quick to listen and slow to speak. That's why you have 2 ears and 1 mouth." Isn't that brilliant? It's a simple reminder that listening should be our default mode in conversations. You know that old adage that says, "It's not what you say, but how you say it"? Well, it turns out it's spot on when it comes to communication. So let's consider the 6th point, nonverbal communication mismatch. Let me say it again, nonverbal communication mismatch. This is where your body language and tone are singing a different tune than your words, and let me tell you, it can create some serious discord in your relationships. First off, let's talk about why body language and tone are so crucial. Did you know that researchers estimate that up to 93% of communication is nonverbal? That's right, folks. Your body is doing most of the talking for you. So here's the statistics. Albert Morabian, a researcher, stated that up to 93% of communication is nonverbal, with a breakdown being roughly 55% body language, 38% tone of voice, and only 7% spoken words. So you see, this shows that your facial expressions, gestures, posture, and the tone of your voice all send powerful messages. When these align with your words, you're golden. But when they don't, well, that's when things get tricky. Again, according to a professor of psychology at San Francisco State University, he said microexpressions or nonverbal cues are unconscious, extremely quick, or sometimes real expressions of an emotion. Although they can be partial and very subtle expressions of emotion, but because they're extremely quick and because they're unconscious when they occur oftentimes less than half a second, sometimes as fast as 1/10 of a second or even 1/15 of a second. Most people don't even see them. Some people do see them, but they don't know what they're seeing. They see something that has changed on the face or countenance of the person they're discussing with, but they don't know exactly what it was that was changed. This shows how our nonverbal communication can speak volumes about our attitudes, confidence, and even competence. It's like we're constantly broadcasting on a nonverbal frequency, whether we realize it or not. So, what are some common nonverbal communication mistakes we all make? The first one is posing with crossed arms. You might just be cold, but this often signals defensiveness or closeness. Next is lack of eye contact. While cultural norms vary in many contexts, avoiding eye contact can suggest dishonesty or a lack of confidence. Another one is using an inconsistent tone. That is saying "I'm fine" through gritted teeth even when your facial expression is saying otherwise. And no one is buying that. Next one is fidgeting. This can signal nervousness or impatience. And finally, invading personal space. Sometimes, standing too close during conflict resolution can make others uncomfortable. Now, how do we align our words with our body language? Here are some tips. First, practice self-awareness. Pay attention to your body. Are your shoulders tense? Is your smile forced? Next, mirror your emotions. If you're expressing excitement, let your face and body show it. Another one is mind your tone. Ensure your voice matches the sentiment of your words. Then use open postures. Uncross your arms, face the person you're talking to. And most importantly, maintain appropriate eye contact. It shows you're engaged and confident. Finally, let's talk about the 7th communication pitfall: neglecting emotional control during conflicts. This is a big one, my friends, because when our emotions run high, our reasoning often runs low. The role of emotions in communication is crucial. They color our perceptions, influence our reactions, and can either enhance or hinder our ability to express ourselves clearly. During conflicts, emotions can act like a double-edged sword. They can fuel passion and drive resolution, or they can escalate tensions and cloud judgment. So, how do we keep our emotions in check? Here are some techniques for emotional regulation. Practice mindfulness. That is, be aware of your emotions without judgment. This helps you respond rather than react. Next is to take a time out. So if your emotions are running too high, it's okay to say, "I need a moment to collect my thoughts." You can also use the stop technique. That is, S means stop arguing. T means to take a deep breath or take a break. O means observe your thoughts and the other person's feelings. Then lastly, P means proceed with the conversation when your calmness technique gives you a moment to cool down and reflect before responding. Or better still, you can forget about the argument if you know it will deeply affect your relationship or marriage. Now, how do we communicate effectively when we're upset? It's not easy, but it's possible. First, acknowledge your emotions. You can say to yourself, "I'm feeling angry right now, but we can work this out later." Next, stick to the present issue. Avoid bringing up past grievances. Again, listen actively. Even when you're upset, try to understand the other person's perspective. Then, take responsibility for your part. For example, you can say this: "I realize I contributed to this problem by doing so and so." As relationship counselors at Heartlink Life, here are some of the things we recommend to resolve conflicts. Number 1, start gently. How you begin a conversation often determines how it will end. Number 2, be open-minded. That is, be open to your partner's perspective, even if you disagree. Thirdly, compromise. Look for a win-win solution. You can meet in the middle to find possible solutions. Next, don't raise your voice. So you know what the Bible says in Proverbs 15 verse 1? "A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." Lastly, be tolerant of each other's faults. Remember, you're dealing with another human being who's just as complex as you are. To conclude, managing emotions during conflicts isn't about suppressing your feelings. It's about expressing them in a way that leads to understanding and resolution, not further conflict. Words are seeds, and they actually land in our hearts and not on the ground. So be careful of the words you plant. Here's a challenge for you. The next time you find yourself in a heated argument with your husband, wife, or colleague, try implementing one of the techniques we mentioned. Notice how it affects the conversation and your own emotional state. You may want to listen to this video again to get a full grasp of what we've discussed and how you can apply it to your relationship. Then, always remember that what counts in a happy relationship is not so much of how compatible you are, but how you deal with your incompatibility. Although your emotions are valid, they don't have to control you. With practice, you can learn to surf the waves of your feelings rather than being swept away by them. So, what do you think? Have you ever successfully managed your emotions during a conflict? What worked for you? Or maybe you have a story about a time when emotions got the better part of you. Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you found value from video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more relationship insights. Until next time, take care, my friend.